So it's going from here to where, your property?
Basically it fans out both sides of the track.
Yeah.
So from down that way to sort of well over that way. We've rarely even walked that way.
So if I look over there,
yes.
Where does your property end? Around where?
The dead tree there.
Yeah.
Pretty much the dead tree.
That one?
Yeah.
Okay.
But it looks like it kind of ends where the trees stop, but from the trees to the river is probably about another 100 meters.
Yes, okay.
And the river does flood from time to time, so there's ancient riverbeds down there.
Yeah. So, and if you would walk alongside the riverbank from that dead tree, say, to over here, that's about like 500 meters or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. So, pretty much what you would expect like a primeval river to look like before anything has been done to it, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
And further down you can see how high the river's been.
Yeah.
There's loads of logs all piled up next to the
Yes,
tree.
yes.
And it's
Whoa, there's a black snake in the water.
Oh, Jesus.
Whoop.
Right? That might be a red belly black actually, but that's a tiny one if it is.
Just give it a try.
Is there a choke somewhere?
Yeah. The best. The best. Unreal.
Do you know that feeling when you look at your own life and at all the past decisions you made, and then you tell yourself that it couldn't have been any other way because you always had good reasons to do exactly what you did at any given point? In other words, it feels like your life would always have ended up being exactly as it is now. But then there are moments of doubt, where you start wondering if you could actually have ended up somewhere completely different if you had just chosen to do things differently for once, to take risks and take a leap of faith. Well, I took a leap of faith a few weeks ago when I stepped onto an airplane to Singapore and then another one to Sydney, Australia, meeting with people that I had never met before. I knew them only from emails, chats and some Zoom calls. What might sound like a dangerous idea to some turned out to be a fantastic journey that I want to cover in 2 videos. And this is the first episode of those 2. In November 2024, I had announced in a video that I was planning to visit Australia. In that video, I had pitched the idea that I could visit a number of workshops in Australia, learn from the people who work there, and offer my help with whatever it is that they are working on. And many answered the call. After a few days, I had more than 100 invitations from all over the continent in my inbox. These replies ranged from very informal meetings to have a beer somewhere to very elaborate plans and suggestions coupled with the invitation to live in people's guest rooms for as long as I wanted and to film and work with them on very specific projects. I want to say again at this point that I'm grateful for each and every one of those emails I received, and I hope you understand that I wasn't able to meet everyone on this first short trip to Australia. I especially want to thank everyone who invited me to more remote places like in Tasmania and also Western and Northern Australia and all around the country. I hope those invitations extend into the future because I hope to take you up on those sooner or later. But let's cut to the chase and let me show you what I did on this journey. Since most international flights seem to go to Sydney Airport, this is where my Australia journey began. I arrived quite late at night and was happy to be picked up at the airport by Jason, who hosted me for a number of days while I explored Sydney. Incredibly, he waited at the airport with this sign that he made especially for this occasion. I thought that was really cool, and he was a fantastic host. The first 2 days in Sydney I mostly spent struggling with my jet lag, caused by the 11-hour time delay. It took me way more than 2 days, by the way, to get completely over it. Since I live in a city of 1 million people myself and had just stayed in Singapore for 3 days, I was actually more excited to see rural landscapes. But when I'm in Sydney for once, I have to do some sightseeing. So I combined that with meeting a number of viewers who had contacted me via email in the weeks and months before. Following the suggestions of the locals, I opted for a ferry ride from Olympic Park, where I was staying, to Circular Quay, where all the ferry lines meet. Aboard the ferry and at the quay, I met some of you guys, and we climbed up on the harbor bridge, enjoying the vistas, and had a few drinks at The Rocks, a part of the city that has many historic houses and old pubs. So I had arrived in Australia, met with some cool people, and had seen some of the most famous tourist sites. However, I had an appointment at a car rental for the next day, and after that I would leave Sydney for now, driving into the wilderness in the Blue Mountains. However, before leaving Sydney, I still had a few hours left, and here is what I decided to do with it. When taking the ferry, this mysterious looking island that had its own ferry stop had caught my interest. Without even looking it up online or knowing anything about it, I decided to step on the ferry a second time the next morning. Next stop, Cockatoo Island. So I got off the ferry and stepped onto the island. And I knew literally nothing about this place. But when I had seen the old factory building with the smokestack the day before, I felt a powerful spell drawing me in. It probably sounds totally irrational, but I knew that there would be something special waiting here for me. Thinking that some company might still be using one of the old buildings for something, I randomly walked over to that gate, thinking that I might find something interesting there. But little did I know what lay behind those walls. So yes, I just waltzed into this building to stumble over the biggest historic machine tools that I have ever seen, free of charge by the way. This long since defunct workshop has several gigantic lathes and all kinds of absolutely enormous historic machine tools and other metalworking equipment like presses and saws and you name it. And this contraption here, that I first believed to be some kind of milling or drilling machine, was also used as a set piece in the movie X-Men Origins Wolverine in 2009, as I later learned. It says on the machine that it was made in 1919. And I'm sending my kind regards to the viewers from the UK and especially in Scotland, who I'm sure are sitting at home teary-eyed, realizing that more than 100 years ago, these machines were made in their countries to be shipped to the other end of the world. Johnson is near Glasgow, and Thomas Shanks and Company was known to make machine tools up to the largest sizes available at the time. Hugh Smith and Company from Glasgow made large pressing and bending machines for heavy steel plates, among other things. This and a huge variety of other machines were made by Craven Brothers in Manchester, England. In fact, all the machines here seem to be of English or Scottish make. As someone who has seen a lot of Germany's industrial heritage and knows about the manufacturing capabilities, especially during the World Wars, it is very interesting to see the equipment that was used by Britain and its colonies on the other side of those wars. So what would these machines have been used for? Well, as I learned when I came here, the dockworks on Cockatoo Island used to be some of the biggest shipyards in Australia. It was in operation from the 19th century until it was closed down in the 1980s. Unfortunately, I didn't have much time to stick around for longer. The rusty charm of this lost place sure has something to it. But maybe I should return in the future and invite about 100 of you guys to come with wire wheels and angle grinders so we can get this shop back to working order. A few weeks later, I would actually return to Sydney, and this time to another huge workshop, but one that is actually still in operation. But I will tell you more about that in the second episode. For now, I picked up my rental and left the big city behind. And while some swear on a GM, I swear out of an MG while exploring New South Wales and Queensland. My first trip and my first time driving the left lane traffic in Australia took me up the Great Western Highway to a valley between Katoomba and Lithgow in the Blue Mountains. This would be about 140 kilometers of driving from Sydney Harbour, but only about 80 kilometers from Penrith City on the outermost fringes of Sydney. The Blue Mountains are an absolutely beautiful part of the country, and it is truly a blessing that a huge city like Sydney has such wonderful landscapes and national parks all around. This is what I came for. My destination for the next 7 days or so is the property of Carl and his family. Carl is a long-time viewer of this channel, and I first spoke to him 3 years ago when I was planning my trip to the United Kingdom, where he is originally from. Back then, I spent an entire week lying flat in my hotel room in Southampton because I was ill and couldn't meet him even though he was just a few kilometers away. Now, we would eventually meet on the other side of the world. Just before arriving at his property, I also had my first quintessential Australian moment, when a bunch of grey Eastern-type kangaroos crossed the street right in front of my car. I eventually arrived in the early evening and fell in love with the landscape right away. The clip you had seen in the very beginning of this video would have given you an impression of the layout of this 30-acre property here in the Blue Mountains. I'm currently driving down the asphalt or bitumen road, as they say here in Australia, that was luckily installed by the former owners some 20 odd years ago. From a German perspective, it is almost unbelievable that all this could be on a single private property. The road leads all the way down to the valley, where you find a typical Australian shed made from steel sheets. You see them everywhere here, and many Aussies convert them to actual houses to live in. This one, however, is currently just a classic storage shed. Carl and his family, who still technically live in the UK, are currently staying on this property for a couple of months to develop it so that they can eventually move here. At the moment, they rent one of the neighboring houses, and that's where I stay too. Wild kangaroos live on this piece of land, and they even ate the grass right in front of my window at night. These grey kangaroos are smaller and not as menacing as some of the big red kangaroos you might have seen on YouTube. If you try to approach them, they usually run away before you can get even anywhere near them. Before I came here, I told Carl that I would be willing to help with whatever work needed to be done. And since there wasn't any construction work going on at that point that I could have helped with, I set my sight on another task. 2 containers packed to the brim with supplies, equipment, tools and all kinds of antique and rare items had been shipped here from the UK on Carl's behalf. Among those items were 3 as of yet completely untested gas-powered generators and tons of untested power tools that Carl had purchased on auctions in the United Kingdom over the years. Since this property is so far not connected to the power grid and with no solar power installed, yet high demand for power tools, I had my work cut out for me. While a normal person would probably start with the newest and least used machine, I will start with the one that has seen the most action in its life. This is a portable gasoline or petrol powered generator rated at 0.6 kVA maximum apparent power output, and from the looks of it, I would guess that this was made in the 1980s. It was sold under the Yanmar brand that you might know from heavy construction equipment, and it was actually made in Japan. It runs on a 4-stroke engine, and the electric generator is rated at 240 volts output voltage since this was sold in the UK. The generator also has an additional 12 volt DC outlet though. I have never seen this specific model before, but I have actually serviced a lot of small generators before, and you will probably laugh at this. These models here in the video are actually way more modern and advanced than most of what I'm working with at home. So what I have learned over the years is that it is usually a good idea to resist the initial urge to just try to force any old piece of equipment back to life the moment you see it, and rather take the time to check for a number of typical issues before potentially making a bad situation worse. With used units, it is simply unlikely that no one has ever tinkered with it before. The first thing that I wanted to do is to remove the spark plug to have a look at it and also test if the ignition works and generates a spark. And here came the first hurdle to overcome. Since I brought no tools on this trip, and with most of Carl's equipment not yet sorted into shelves or drawers, and being decades old and from the UK, it wasn't all that easy to find a key to remove the spark plug, since most of what I could find here was imperial or too small. Eventually, I was able to make it work with this ratchet set here. The spark plug is definitely used, but I think there's a good chance that it will still do the job. And here's the first thing that is actually not okay. This little bulb or reservoir here sits under the fuel cock and is full of debris. It was not properly screwed on, and the old gasket is also brittle. Had I not checked this first, a steady amount of fuel would have leaked out of here and collected at the bottom of the enclosure. I cleaned everything and was lucky to be able to find a gasket ring in the shed that I could insert here instead. This being a 4-stroke engine, oil is not mixed with gasoline like in a 2-stroke generator. Instead, there is a separate intake for motor oil and a dipstick to check the oil level. And according to this, there still is sufficient oil in here. And after taking the air filter out of its housing, I washed it out and let it dry. The filter housing itself was very oily and dirty, and I did my best to wipe it clean. This, by the way, is a governor mechanism that is used to run the engine at a constant speed, relatively independent of the load attached to the generator. Naturally, a higher electrical load on the electric generator will also put a higher mechanical load on the combustion engine. The generator has to maintain a high enough voltage and frequency though. And in older videos of mine from a few years back, I've shown you centrifugal governor mechanisms connecting to the gas lever of the carburetor. Here sitting in the top right corner. As a given load increases, the rotational speed of the engine is about to go down. The governor then causes the engine to rev up. Depending on the quality of the engine, you can keep the frequency of the current somewhat stable, usually plus minus 10% or something like that. Another problem that you encounter rather often is a damaged hand starter mechanism. I'm testing this one, currently without a spark plug installed, just to see how it feels. And all seems to be fine here. So after also cleaning the spark plug, I did a spark test by holding the plug against the engine housing. So with all that out of the way, it was time to fill some fuel into the tank and test the generator. We attached different kinds of loads and the little generator performed well. I think the biggest advantage of this little unit is how easy it is to carry around. Something that could come really in handy while working around this rather steep terrain. The second generator is a very special case. A Suzuki generator based on another 4-stroke engine. Carl bought this unit at an auction in the original box, including the owner's manual and shipping documents. The manual is from 1986 and the unit was shipped to a gentleman in Titchfield, Fareham, England in 1991. And upon inspecting the generator all around, including the inside of the fuel tank, I have come to the conclusion that this unit, that is at least 34 years old, has never been used. After inserting motor oil and filling fuel into the tank, it was time for the moment of truth. Is there a choke somewhere?
Here. Yeah, good. The bed. The bed. Unreal.
So yeah, that was a moment of tremendous relief, just seeing this old machine jump to life right away, like right away. In my opinion, this generator, by the way, is of very high quality and is basically new. With its higher power rating, this could turn into Carl's workhorse down here in this remote valley. But did you see these two different colored and maybe unusual looking outlets here? What's going on with that? Well, more about that in just a minute. Let us first test the third generator as well. The third machine is another small unit that one man can carry around by himself. Unlike the two others, this is based on a two-stroke engine. Work Zone is a name used for relatively cheap power tools and other equipment sold by the German supermarket chain Aldi. This unit also has an Austrian address on it. It was sold in the UK though and has a UK type socket. It came with some service tools that looked like they got really wet at some point, and I did my best to undo some of that damage with whatever I could find around the shed. The unit itself, that is about 10 years old, was a little dusty, but other than that I believe it to be unused as well. But I even found a mixing bottle for two-stroke mixture and prepared some fresh fuel and tried to start it as well. So with all three generators running, Carl had power down at the shed for the first time, and now I could proceed to find out if any of those tools are even running. Carl has bought tons of stuff on public auctions in the UK over the years. It is part of his job, and he would have handled so many items over the years that I don't blame him for not testing the tools before shipping everything to Australia. Moving to a different country is a huge job, and a million things need to be taken care of. One thing that would have made it harder for Carl to test these tools back home is that many of them run on 120 volts and they use yellow European CEE type connectors, while normal households in the UK use 240 volts and have type G sockets and plugs, also referred there to as BS1363. But here is where the two different outlets on the Suzuki generator come into play, because unlike the other two generators, it doesn't have a type G socket at all. Instead, it has a blue and a yellow CEE outlet. The blue one is for 240 and the yellow one for 120 volts. The generator delivers both voltages. With a simple adapter from CEE to BS1363, you can run normal British appliances and power tools from that blue outlet. Australian households have type I outlets though with 230-240 volts, and an adapter from the blue outlet to type I would be all you need to power those as well. 120 volt outlets would allow you to run American equipment. The difference between 50 and 60 Hertz in the frequency of the current, by the way, doesn't make a huge difference for many things. For example, power tools that run on universal motors, they don't care about the frequency of the current provided. However, I don't think that's why this generator has that yellow 120 volt outlet. See, those rather professional looking power tools that Carl bought at auctions also came with these yellow step down and isolation transformers that would be needed to run this equipment in Britain. And I think that they do that for safety reasons. See, in my last repairathon, we saw this LED lamp that is made for 42 volts AC, and it had this white CEE style connector on its backside. That was because it was a class 3 device that is supposed to be safe to operate in dangerous environments. It seems that the 240 to 120 volt isolation transformers are supposed to serve that same purpose, only well to a lesser degree of safety over in the UK. It is kind of funny to see all these parallel systems in use here. The shed has power sources, extension cables and equipment with 4 different plugs from the UK and Australia and 2 different voltage levels as well. I love it. While testing the power tools, Carl said a line that I thought was really hilarious. It could have turned out that I am a huge idiot shipping broken tools halfway around the world. Well, luckily he was wrong though, and almost everything worked right from the start. Only very minor fixes were needed. Carl also had planned for a family outing on the second day of my stay, so I tagged along to the Lithgow show. Lithgow is just a small town and it really gave everything it got on this town show. Snake handling, a mullet competition, a Scottish marching band, motorcycles, jumping ramps, a helicopter, and even a mobile bar run by the local brewery that offered 8 or so different styles of beers made there. And I actually met yet another one of my viewers at the Lithgow show, and we had a few of those together. But what's going on with the Aussie head, you ask? Well, I found that down in the shed in the valley and needed protection from the sun. Also, while in Rome, do as the Romans do, right? All in all, I had less than a week to stay here in the mountains, and the days flew by without me even noticing it. I really loved it here, but I had to go on with my road trip, because I had an appointment in Brisbane, in Queensland, more than 1,000 kilometers to the north. So I kept on driving through the different national parks surrounding Sydney for about 3.5 hours and made my first stop in a town called Gosford, north of that big city. I had been invited by the first other YouTuber that I was about to meet on this trip. And my next host, like actually all of my hosts on this trip, embody what I often miss here in Germany. The willingness to take the risk to walk off the beaten path and change your life according to your own rules. Alex, who was born in the UK and moved to America when he was just 19 years old with nothing but a duffel bag and a few $100s to his name, seems to have reinvented himself over and over again. After living in the US for many years, he decided for another change of scenery at one point and came to Australia. That was actually years ago, and he has since become a proud citizen of this country. He invited me to stay the night at his home, and I really enjoyed the hospitality of him and his wife Catherine. A man of many talents and an impressive autodidact, he has been able to become a certified mechanic after teaching himself about topics that he felt really passionate about. We got along really great, and that's why I wanted to give him the chance to present himself here in his own words. Yeah, so today we are in Alex's workshop. Say hello.
Hello.
Hi, Alex.
Hi.
And yeah, he's into motorcycles.
Can you tell? Maybe not. Maybe it's just a coincidence.
Okay, so Alex, maybe you want to say a few sentences about what you're doing here.
Yeah, sure. So started the business initially focusing on these things, police bikes, as the name on the logo suggests. So we've restored a number of quite iconic bikes for various police departments and contributed to the restoration of other bikes. From here, specifically with the Kawasaki models in mind, we've had to source a collection of used parts in order to complete these restorations. And we've actually done 3 Kawasaki police bikes. And in order to do that, because these parts have been out of production for many years, we've acquired job lots of stuff. So the buckets that you see on the floor containing all these parts, the various fasteners, pieces of electrical equipment, all relate to these bikes. They're all Kawasaki's. And in sorting them out, which you have to do on the floor because there's just so much stuff, that's my excuse, anyway, I'm sticking to it. In sorting them out, this is the way we do it, and then we're able to reuse the original parts, refurbish them, bring them back to original spec, and complete these police motorcycle restorations. So, as a cunningly prepared segue into the restoration, what we have on the floor is a series of indicators for a Kawasaki Z1000 Mark II. They're used in a bunch of other models like the 750s, but this lot came off of a Mark II. And what you're seeing before is really what we get in general. So used rusty, we refer to this as rusty gold, but these are all the original items made by Stanley with a specific part number on here. And this specific part number can be traced to a specific application. So in restoring these, in other words, having them stripped back to bare metal and re-chromed, what we're able to do is maintain the originality of the bike. And then we supplement the re-chroming process. There are some stems over there, the original Stanleys that have been re-chromed. We then source new old stock original parts to add to these. So what you see on the left here is a re-chromed indicator bucket, so that's come out of re-chroming, with a new old stock indicator shaft, obviously that goes in there, an original Kawasaki gasket for the lens with an original lens, and two new old stock indicators complete with lens, brand new old stock from Kawasaki. So this is what the sort of level of originality we go for on these bikes is, and that's why the process takes such a long time. So another example, rather a glowing example of your traditional barn find compared to the post-restoration version of the carburetor. So they're two different models obviously, but this one has quite literally been pulled out of a barn. We will be happy to supply genuine Australian leaves and general dirt to anybody that would like some. This will be sent out for repair after it's been stripped down, and what we do is this all gets blasted back to bare metal using a very gentle media. All of these carb tops, which should be polished, will be. All of the fasteners are replaced with correct Kawasaki part, so brand new fasteners which are still available. The whole assembly is completely taken apart, and what you get left with is something like this. This isn't factory fresh at the moment because it's actually been on the Z1000 that's behind you, but this is an example of the level of craftsmanship that goes into the restoration. This is every bit as good, if not better, I would argue, than how they came out of the factory. This one's off a Z650, that one's off a Z1000, but the process is exactly the same. Anything that's perishable is taken apart, everything's lubricated, blasted, and made to look absolutely beautiful. So very, very happy with the results, and my customers agree, so hooray. Okay, so perfect example of a bigger picture is this particular bike. It's a 1977 Kawasaki Z1000 A1. This was produced in this configuration for only 1 year. So they're quite hard to find, and this was an Australian delivered bike. When we received it, it was just a collection of boxes and looked absolutely dreadful. And obviously that's not the case now. So it's been restored, it's already sold, but been restored to a customer who requested that we paint it in the Kawasaki Z900 color scheme from 1974 to match his current 2022 Kawasaki Z900 RS. Absolutely beautiful. It's I don't know what it's called, but it's a candy green flake in here, and with all the chrome it really, really pops. As with most projects, just as an aside, you put them together. We received the engine as sort of a more or less complete lump, but in testing the bike to make sure everything worked together, we noticed that there was an oil leak. And it turns out that whoever put the engine back together, not naming any names, perhaps used some parts that they shouldn't have. And I'll be happy to show you what the problem is with those parts. Okay, so this is an example of why it's important to use OEM parts. As you can see right here, this is roughly what a valve stem seal should look like. And just for context, this little thing fits over that part right there. So essentially the valve goes through that piece, and that's what stops oil blowing back into the engine. In this particular case, although all the valve seals were new, they were not Kawasaki branded, and you can see with 0 kilometers on them, this one has a giant tear in the side, a little bit hard to see, and that one, in being removed, has completely disassembled. So that was, these two pieces are supposed to be just one valve seal themselves. This aftermarket stuff is generally about half the price of the Kawasaki stuff, but you run the risk of this being the problem. So this has been the problem. We've pulled the head. We've now ordered the correct Kawasaki valve seals. They'll all go back together and should work perfectly. We have a series on the channel that refers to what not to do. And if you really hate your wife, this is probably what you want to do, but in general, don't do this. When we purchased this bike, it was fitted with a correct BMW pillion seat. That's where the correct bit stopped. The pillion seat was held in place with this strap, I kid you not. No mounting hardware, no nothing. So I can only assume he was going for a very swift divorce. I'm kidding, I'm kidding. So the idea is that this we'll remove this monstrosity from the bike. The idea is that in returning this to its original configuration, this was produced by BMW Motorrad in Berlin as an authority spec BMW R1200 RT K26 model. We've reinstated all the lights, the bracketry that supports the lights. You can probably see down the front there's another bracket that's for the siren or electronic tone system. So there's two, obviously. And the bike has been returned to its original configuration using used but genuine BMW police bike parts.
If you want to, you can now turn on the lights.
Yep. This is what all boys wish they had. This.
I actually visited Alex twice on this trip, you know, on my way up and then the way back to Sydney. And I would have enjoyed to be his helping hand for a while, and I hope that I will get a second chance to do that in the future. However, for now, I still had many hundreds of kilometers to drive north to Brisbane. The drive up the east coast from Sydney to Brisbane is pretty much just 1,000 kilometers of straight highway, or motorway as they call it here. You don't have to make any real turns, you just follow the road. Even though it leads up north and parallel to the coastline, you don't actually see much of the ocean unless you take detours on purpose. Out of, say, 10 hours of driving, you mostly drive through wooded areas for 8 hours or so, while the traffic gets thinner and thinner the further north you get. Until, like in my case, you find yourself completely alone on the road for stretches of time. You know that there are coast towns somewhere to your right, but you don't see them from the road. The hinterland to your left doesn't seem to have many villages in the European sense at all. It's more like scattered farmlands. I spent one night in Coffs Harbour, but other than that, I simply pressed on to reach Brisbane. My next stop reflects on a contradiction in my YouTube channel. See, in a real apocalypse, meaning a real collapse of civilization as we know it, my work of the last 10 years would simply vanish into thin air, as YouTube, together with probably all of the internet as we know it, would go the way of the dodo. A much more durable way to preserve and communicate knowledge is through physical media, particularly through books, well, at least if people are still able to read. In that line of thinking, I was really looking forward to learning from my next host, Darren Schneider, who grew up on a farm in Queensland. His family came to Australia generations ago, back in the 19th century, from Germany, by the way. A man who obviously also reinvented himself several times over, because after having professional careers in completely unrelated fields, he decided to turn his hobby into his job. And that happened during the pandemic. A collector and restorer of antique machines and tools related to those old crafts, he invited me to help with a restoration project and also learn about bookbinding itself. And in a few minutes I will actually show you how I made my first book in his workshop. But before that, let's meet him and learn a little bit about the machines and tools that I encountered in his shop. And this is one of the machines that he is currently restoring. And in this bit of footage here, you can see me doing a little bit of work on one part of a big old English-made paper shear that is one of the latest additions to his workshop. While chatting with Darren and exchanging stories, I did my best to clean this beautiful old Acme screw from all the dirt and grime that has been sitting in its grooves for decades. In my experience, the simplest way is sometimes the best. You can ruin your entire workshop or house depending on where you do it by removing this much dirt with an angle grinder, you know. Doing it with an old-fashioned hand wire brush is the best way in my opinion. While at his place, I also tried to help with fixing some other equipment around the house. But during my rather limited time here, I actually tried to learn as much as possible about the typical tools, machines and techniques of these rather rare trades. So let's hear it from himself. Okay, so here, there are a few smaller bits and bobs on this workbench here. This is apparently some kind of drill. What does it do?
Yes, it is a paper drill. It's a nice multi-purpose tool. It's typical to have in a printing shop and a bookbinding shop. So printers often did simple bookbinding tasks. They might do print something that goes into a ring binder, and rather than sending that job out to a bookbinder, they would have a paper drill where they could drill the holes for the ring binder. This is a machine for making miters in lead. So for doing borders, if you had a border or a table in a newspaper, you can put this in here and spin it around and it'll take a shaving of lead off. That's why it's got this big flywheel, so it can cut through lead and takes little shavings of lead off. This one has Wimble, which is a famous Australian printing company on it. Frederick Wimble was the first person to make printer's ink in Australia, and but they also imported equipment from other countries. There's a slug cutter, so slugs are the pieces of lead that were put in between the lines to space out printing in books and newspapers. This is a Poco proof press, so it was designed to take a proof of type that had been set, and that would go off to a proofreader, and once the proofreader was happy with any corrections, then it could go off to the main printing presses. It's really quite simple. The type, locked up type, it might even be just tied up with string, goes into this chase. It would have come over on a metal tray like this, which is called a galley, because they go into galley racks. So you would ink the type like that, take a piece of paper, lay the paper on the top of it, and then run it through, and then that would be printed on that side. This is my latest edition. It's a tabletop platen printing press. It works by having type in this chase here. Ink is put on this ink plate or ink disc, and then the paper is placed on this platen. So the rollers go up, take ink off the plate, the rollers come back down, go across the front of the type, putting ink on the type, and then a piece of paper is placed here, and next time up that paper will be pressed into the type and receive an impression such as up here. And then that is the in-feed table, out-feed table, so you would just sit here going like this, have this paper, put it there, do that, take it, another one. I'm going to feel like I'm a custodian for a historic machine. In this area, I put a title on a book. I use a foiling machine that uses a hot press to press a fake gold foil into the book. I use a brass type. It's more robust than printer's lead type. And then I'll do some practice runs, and then I'll do the final book. When these become available, I buy them. I particularly like this English-made Marshall press, so that's why I've got two of these. I've got the much larger version that can do a whole cover at once, not just the title. And I even have a gas-fired version over there, and I've even got another one in storage.
Following Darren's instructions, I was also able to bind a book myself without any previous experience in the field, and here is what I did. The process begins by creating a text block. In a printed book, the paper sheets would have text printed on them, of course. The pages in this one, though, will be empty, like in a sketchbook. At first, a number of paper sheets were carefully folded in the middle using a bone folder, which is maybe the most iconic hand tool of the bookbinding trade. After repeating that process a number of times, a piece of sturdy cardboard is cut into 4 rectangles of equal size using a ruler and a sharp knife. The folded sheets and pieces of board now form a loose block that is now clamped into this wooden bookbinding press. According to Darren's instructions, I now mark a number of spots on the paper block using a pencil, and after removing the sheets from the paper press, this is where holes for sewing are pre-punched using a stitching awl, another classic tool of the bookbinder's trade. Following Darren's instructions closely, I now use a needle and thread to sew the sheets together in a specific interlinking pattern and continue doing that until all the sheets are connected. These somewhat darker colored sheets of very thick paper are also folded in half and sewed to both the bottom and top side of the text block. In the meantime, and unfortunately with the camera out of focus, I had to cut 2 pieces of very sturdy yet decorative cardboard to this exact shape here, before gluing them in between the 2 sides of these folded sheets of darker paper on the outside of the text block. After applying the glue and holding everything together by hand, the block is inserted into the wooden press once again. As you can see, we did it so that the spine of the book protrudes from the press for a centimeter or so, and while the glue is drying inside, even more glue is applied to the spine itself, where I had sewn the sheets together just a minute ago. The type of glue that we've been using here dries rather quickly. Other than having to wait for that to happen, the text block was now finished. But a book like that would not last very long and also isn't nice to look at. The next step is therefore to add covering materials to the text block. In this case, we are using a combination of covering cloth and paper. I chose this red covering material that I cut to a precise shape using a knife and then folded along a ruler so that it fits around the text block nicely. After applying glue here as well, one of the more sophisticated tools of the trade is called to action. Instead of using a press, a brick is placed on the block to press it together. While that dries, the next step was to choose covering paper of a style that goes well with the red cloth material. I decided to use this green paper here that Darren had colored himself beforehand. And here you can see me gluing the covering paper to the book before folding it over on the inside. As you can see, there is also another decorative piece of paper being glued to the text block from the inside. We chose a special material that contains some percentage of colorful fabrics. I'm sure I'm just brushing over many important details here, but you get the idea. The corners of the covering paper had also to be cut in a diagonal fashion, and a bone folder is used in many places to fold over the paper to glue it down. The amount of glue that is actually needed for every step, and that won't ruin your book by smearing it all over the place, is certainly a matter of experience that I don't have. So, after pressing and drying it once again, I can present the first book I ever made. There are certainly way more difficult and sophisticated ways to make books, and I'm sure Darren has chosen a simple method that is suited for a total beginner like myself. But he will do a much better job explaining all that on his YouTube channel, Das Bookbinding, that you should subscribe to if you are interested in learning more about this beautiful old craft. I spent about 4 days with Darren and really learned a lot at his workshop. But he also gave me a tour of the city of Brisbane. I'm very thankful for him hosting and teaching me, and I wish that I can return at some point to do a little more for him in return. And now I had reached a point on my trip where I no longer had any fixed plans of where to go next. I had done this on purpose because I knew from other trips in the past that trail magic will conjure up opportunities that you can't plan for from home. In this case, a magic trail revealed itself when Darren recommended that I contact the fantastic Neil Paskin of the YouTube channel Pask Makes, who happens to live about 1.5 hours to the north on the Sunshine Coast of Queensland. And since I had never spoken to him in person, I had no idea what would happen. But I will tell you all about it in the next Australia episode. The next video will be a regular episode filmed in Germany. But after that will be a second episode covering my stay at Neil, as well as my trip to his close friends Corin of Nerock Tools in Picton, as well as Matt, who runs Australia's biggest traditional blacksmithing forge at Everleigh Works in Sydney. By the way, if you would like me to visit your workshop in the future and do something similar to where you live or work, just send me an email using this email address. And if you have watched up to this point, then I'm sure you liked this video. In that case, please give it a like. It really would mean a lot to me. And in case you want to support my channel and help with future video production, please consider making a donation. A link for that is under the video. Or become a supporter on Patreon under patreon.com/tpAI. See you soon.
People will give up leather bookbinding because of how difficult it is to pare leather. A famous bookbinding author, Arthur Johnson, said, "The only thing you need for paring leather is a sharp knife and confidence. But how do you get confidence, right? It's a tricky thing."